Fresh meat.
In 1974, one of the most revered and controversial horror films of all time was released. It would introduce the world to a chainsaw-wielding madman known as Leatherface. With the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, critics would applaud its use of atmosphere and lack of gore to underline the complete terror that audiences would endure while watching it. The stark brutality froze audiences to their very core. One thing no one really seemed to comment on was the film's use of black humor throughout. Director Tobe Hooper seemed to think the film was hilarious, but no one else seemed to pick up on that. When he was approached by Canon Films about doing a sequel, he decided he would make the dark humor the main focus of the film this time around so that it couldn't be ignored. Hooper decided the movie needed to also embrace the trend of the times to throw in a lot of blood and gore. What would ensue has divided horror fans ever since. Let's find out on What the F*** Happened to This Horror Movie. I want to thank you guys for watching What the F*** Happened to This Horror Movie, and ask that if you enjoy our shows, please subscribe to our channel right now, like this video, and click on the bell so you can be notified each time a new video goes up. And now, back to the show. After the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Tobe Hooper went on to direct other notable horror properties like Eaten Alive, Life Force, and Poltergeist, so it seemed he had left Texas Chainsaw Massacre behind. He eventually would come back around to the idea of a sequel and what that would look like. Hooper would hit up genre studio Canon Films to pitch his ideas. Canon was so excited to get into the Texas Chainsaw Massacre business that it said that the studio head Menahem Golan greenlit the movie after only hearing the first 5 lines of the pitch. This wouldn't last, as after hearing the full pitch, they would turn the idea down. At first, Hooper pitched an idea of an entire town of cannibals, which would satirize the film Motel Hell. This was a full circle moment, as that film was a satire of the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The title he had in mind was Beyond the Valley of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The studio was not impressed and rejected that idea. Eventually, Hooper brought in L.M. Kit Carson to help him come up with ideas for the movie. After a short time, they finally nailed down what would become Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. In the film, the Sawyer family returns to wreak havoc on Texas once again. Well, out one night, a couple of guys use their fancy car phone to call into a radio station. During the call, they run afoul of Leatherface, and he cuts them to pieces live on the air. The radio DJ Stretch has the call on tape and tries to convince a local Texas Ranger named Lefty that this is the Sawyer family. Lefty turns out to be the uncle of Sally and Franklin from the first film. He gets her to play the tape on the radio again to try and bring out the cannibalistic family. It works a little too well, as a guy named Chop Top and Leatherface himself visit Stretch at the station. After they kill her co-worker LG, Leatherface develops a crush on her and lets her live, while indicating to Chop Top that he had killed her. They leave, and Stretch follows them to an abandoned amusement park. It just so happens that Lefty is also on his way there, and both enter to confront the Sawyer family and hopefully end their killing spree for all time. Hooper had no intention of directing the film and had only intended to come on board as a producer. Once the budget started to get slashed, which seems to have happened a lot on Canon Films, he realized he was going to have to direct it, as they couldn't afford to hire anyone else. Even through filming, the budget would keep getting changed. This seemed to reflect on how well other Canon films seemed to be doing at the moment. One week, they were doing well, so the budget would go up. The next week, another film wasn't doing so good, so the budget got cut. It was a strange back and forth that caused a lot of confusion on the film set. When putting together the cast, they first went to the original Leatherface, Gunnar Hansen. He claims that the studio offered him scale plus 10% to cover his agent fee. When he told them he didn't have an agent, they then dropped the offer down to just scale. He would turn the role down, saying the offer was too low. Unit publicist Scott Holton refutes this, saying that Hansen wavered on taking the part, and eventually the studio rescinded the offer. Either way, it meant we were getting a new Leatherface. One person Tobe Hooper had kept in mind if he ever did a sequel was Bill Moseley. He was a huge fan of the original film and even went so far as to film a short film called The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. In it, he played the hitchhiker character from the original film. He showed it to some screenwriting friends, one of which knew Hooper. He asked if he could show it to him, and Moseley let him. Hooper ended up loving it and told Moseley that if he ever did a sequel, that he would keep him in mind for a part. When it came time to make the sequel, he offered the part of Chop Top to Mosley. He is actually supposed to be the twin brother of the hitchhiker. In the film, you can see Mosley and Leatherface carry around the now dried up and long dead body of the hitchhiker throughout the movie. Dennis Hopper was brought in to play the character of Lefty. He would claim afterwards that it was the worst film he ever made. At least, that was until Super Mario Bros. In 1993. His character's high energy during the journey through the abandoned amusement park kept the film moving. And really, who doesn't want to see Dennis Hopper have a chainsaw fight with Leatherface? The image of him wielding two small chainsaws like revolvers is what cinema gold is made of. There was a deleted storyline that we learned that Lefty is actually Stretch's father. The pacing issues and unneeded relationship between the characters made Hooper drop it. It wasn't a complete through line in the film, as it was barely noticeable after it had been taken out. One person who was cut out of the film, pun intended, was genre film historian Joe Bob Briggs. He showed up in a small cameo, but was ultimately cut from the movie. Briggs has been a big supporter of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise. He calls the first film the greatest movie ever made, and gave a favorable review to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation. He did, however, say that Part 3 wimped out due to the amount of editing made to get an R rating. After the film had been going on for a short time, Canon began to worry that the production was taking too long and going over budget. They sent Newt Arnold down to keep an eye on things. He had a bunch of different jobs on various movie sets, but on this one, he seemed to be strictly the eyes and ears of the studio. They wanted to make sure that things were getting done quicker, but with fewer takes. He must have done a good job, as they would later let him direct the film Bloodsport. If only we could have gotten the Jean-Claude Van Damme Leatherface crossover. One of the things the studio must not have been happy with is that one night in Austin, the building they were using for the production caught fire. The fire department showed up to do their job, and to their dismay, found a building with all sorts of dismembered body parts and skeletons. They thought they had stumbled upon the lair of a serial killer. I'm sure they were relieved to know it was just Leatherface and his cannibalistic family. Finally, the film was finished and sent off to the MPAA for rating. Of course, they slapped it with an X rating. After a lot of back and forth, it was obvious that nothing they could do was going to make the MPAA happy, so the film instead was released unrated. This could have caused issues with getting an R rating for Part 3, as the MPAA seems to hold a grudge. When the film did finally hit theaters, fans of the original were let down. They thought Hooper had taken this bleak, dead serious film and turned it into a comedy. Hooper attests that he just ramped up the dark humor of the original. He says the humor was always there, but because of the shocking content of the first one, it was completely overshadowed. Here, he kept the focus on it, and it shines through. It eventually would find its own audience among the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise. Someone who felt like the film lived on outside of its original release is Caroline Williams. She loved playing the character of Stretch, and has shared that she still does, even if no one realizes it. While not official, because then people have to be paid money, she claims the character has shown up in other films and even in other Texas Chainsaw movies. While talking to Dread Central, she ran down where Stretch has been seen since Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. The character actually shows up in Leatherface, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. Director Jeff Berge told her, quote, "Look, I don't know how long these chainsaw films will carry on, but I want to keep your character alive. I don't want to get rid of you. You are not mentioned anywhere in this screenplay, but I want to make sure that for the ages, if anybody wants to revisit Stretch, it has to be you. You will be seen in Part 3. The fans will know it's you." After that, she stopped by the New Orleans swamp in Hatchet 3. She said, while talking with the director, quote, "BJ McDonald told me, she's Stretch. That's what you're doing here. I played the character of Amanda precisely, as she would be. Stretch grew up. She changed her name. She married a law enforcement guy played by Zach Galligan, and she split because she's a woman who is obsessed with pursuing these legends, these myths, which in her mind are not myths. And if you're a fan of the Sharknado films, she does appear as a character named Stretch in Sharknado 4. So how is that for a horror movie cinematic universe? Well, it's not a huge cultural milestone like the original. It did speak on themes of the times. It expanded the Sawyer family out of their Texas home and into the world, which may be scarier. Rather than accidentally stumbling upon the family after your car breaks down, they could be your neighbors, That chainsaw you hear in your neighborhood early on a Sunday morning while you're trying to sleep, that could be Leatherface, doing more than cutting people limb from limb. He's robbing you from sleeping in on your day off. What a jerk.